Night had fallen, thick and heavy, pressing against the windows of the small station like a living thing. The forest beyond seemed to breathe, shadows twisting and curling in the glow of flickering streetlights. Inside, a boy's photo rested on Helena's desk, a reminder of years lost to a system that sometimes failed to notice the smallest cries. Daniel watched Valor pacing near the door, the dog's ears twitching at sounds too faint for human ears. Something was calling them, something buried beneath snow, ice, and time. Then Helena gasped. Her finger froze on the screen. "Daniel, I think I found him." The name on the record made Daniel's stomach tighten. Ethan Carter. Missing. 5 years. And yet, staring back at them, was a boy who mirrored every description Jacob had whispered about himself. Every detail, every nuance, perfectly aligned. Valor let out a low, commanding growl, his gaze fixed on the tree line outside. In that moment, Daniel understood. The search wasn't over. It had just begun, and whatever waited beyond those shadows, they wouldn't face it alone. Because some connections, between human and dog, between courage and loyalty, ran deeper than fear, and tonight they would be tested. The Sierra Nevada mountains held their breath that night. Snow lay heavy on the peaks, blanketing the ridgelines in a pale hush, and the road carved through it like a vein of black glass. The storm that had raged through the afternoon had calmed into silence, but it was the kind of silence that pressed in, thick and watchful, as though the forest itself was listening. Officer Daniel Cole eased his patrol SUV along the narrow, twisting road, the tires crunching softly over packed ice. The headlights painted tunnels of light through the drifts, catching on the trunks of tall pines that loomed like sentinels on either side. The wipers scraped in a slow, rhythmic arc, fighting the flurries still falling from a sky bruised with cloud. Daniel's hands were steady on the wheel, but his eyes flicked often to the rear view, the side mirrors, to the shapes that shifted and disappeared in the snow. He had learned long ago that trouble didn't announce itself with fanfare. It came quietly, creeping in through the places you thought were safe. Beside him, in the passenger seat, lay his partner, Valor. The German shepherd's frame filled the seat, his sable coat thick with winter fur, dusted faintly grey around the muzzle. At 8 years old, he carried the marks of a seasoned K9, scars beneath the fur from years of service, muscles firm though no longer young, and eyes that seemed to read the world in ways no human could. Those eyes, deep amber, flecked with gold, were fixed now on the road ahead, unblinking, alert. The kind of eyes that made criminals falter and children reach out with hesitant trust. Daniel glanced at him and felt, as he often did, a pang of gratitude that words could never capture. Valor had been with him longer than anyone else in recent memory. Through late-night calls, violent arrests, and the kind of cases that left a man questioning humanity itself, Valor had been there, silent, loyal, unshakable. The heater hummed, pushing back the cold that clawed at the windows, but Daniel could still feel the bite of winter in his bones. He flexed his hands once on the steering wheel, the leather creaking beneath his grip. His thoughts, unbidden, drifted home. To the small house in town where his daughter lay, curled under too many blankets, cheeks flushed from fever. Hannah, 7 years old, fragile in ways that tore at him more than any suspect's knife or gun ever had. Her illness came and went, like tides, some days leaving her with enough strength to tease him about his grumpy cop face. Other days, stealing her laughter entirely. Tonight, He had left her in the care of his sister, promising he would be back before she woke. He hated breaking promises. The road curved sharply, climbing higher. Daniel slowed, the headlights sweeping across a guardrail frosted in white. Beyond it, the mountains fell away into blackness, valleys hidden beneath layers of drifting snow. He drew in a breath, steady, letting the air burn his lungs before releasing it slow. "Quiet tonight," he murmured, though he hadn't expected an answer. Valor's ears flicked at the sound, head tilting just slightly toward his voice, then returning to the glass. It was enough. Daniel reached absently, his gloved hand brushing the thick fur at Valor's neck. The dog leaned into it for the barest second before straightening again, posture perfect, waiting, always waiting. Divorce papers had been signed 2 winters ago, a casualty of long nights, missed dinners, and the emotional chasms that form when one partner lives in constant danger. His ex-wife had taken her smile, her laughter, her patience, and left him with silence. Valor had filled that silence. Not with words, but with presence. And sometimes, presence was all a man needed to keep going. The SUV's radio crackled briefly with static, then fell quiet again. Daniel reached to adjust the volume, but no call came through. Just the night, stretching long and endless across the mountains. Outside, the forest pressed close. Pines groaned under the weight of snow, branches bending like weary shoulders. The smell of resin mixed with cold air filtered faintly through the vents, sharp and clean. Every so often, flakes fell in clusters from the treetops, exploding into powder when they hit the road's edge. Daniel's hazel eyes scanned the tree line, a habit more than a necessity. He had patrolled enough winters to know how quickly stillness could turn into chaos. A stranded car, a lost hiker, a desperate man who thought the snow would hide his sins. The Sierra Nevada was beautiful, yes, but beauty didn't erase danger. Valor shifted, a low exhale fogging the passenger window. His gaze locked briefly on something in the darkness, then eased. Daniel followed it anyway, peering into the shadows, but saw nothing beyond snow and branches swaying gently in the wind. He trusted Valor more than he trusted his own instincts, but not every glance meant danger. Sometimes even a dog like Valor was simply listening to the world breathe. Daniel leaned back, letting the hum of the engine settle into the silence. He thought again of Hannah, of her small hand gripping his thumb when she asked if he would be gone all night. He had kissed her forehead, brushed hair from her damp cheek, and told her he'd be back before she woke. A lie of comfort, spoken by a father who needed to believe it himself. His gaze returned to the road just as a gust of wind swept across, rocking the SUV slightly. Snow whirled in the beams of light, a white veil that blurred the world for a heartbeat. Daniel slowed further, tires gripping against the slick. He pressed his lips together, a line of focus etched into his face. Out here, mistakes weren't forgiven easily. Valor sat straighter, ears pricking. Daniel noticed, muscles tensing instinctively. He followed the dog's stare but saw only the endless road stretching into darkness. Still, that was the thing about nights like this. The quiet wasn't always peace. Sometimes it was the moment before something broke. He let out a breath, glancing once more at his partner. "We'll get through another night, old boy," he muttered. Valor's tail thumped once against the seat, a soft sound in the hush. No bark, no growl, just quiet affirmation. And so the patrol continued. A man and his dog, cutting through a mountain silence too deep to trust, carrying with them the weight of broken promises, fragile hope, and the unspoken bond that made them more than partners. The storm had ended, yes, but the night had only just begun. The mountain road curved again, and for a moment the SUV's beams were swallowed by falling snow. Daniel slowed, leaning forward slightly as though he could will his headlights to cut deeper through the storm. The silence pressed in thicker than before, the kind of silence that gnawed at instinct and made the hairs on a man's arms rise even beneath layers of wool. That was when he saw movement. A flicker. No, a shape. The high beam stretched farther, and the whiteness gave way to two figures stumbling along the shoulder of the road. Daniel's breath caught, his hands tightening on the wheel. One was a boy, no older than 12, thin frame bent under the weight of what he carried. The other was smaller, far smaller. A child wrapped in a faded pink blanket, limp against the boy's chest. Daniel's pulse spiked. He braked carefully, tires crunching, SUV rocking slightly as it came to a stop. Snowflakes darted like sparks in the beams, swirling around the children as though the storm itself meant to bury them. "Dear God," Daniel muttered under his breath. Beside him, Valor was already moving, ears stiff, body angled forward. A low whine slipped from his throat, not the growl of danger, but the sound he used when something was wrong, terribly wrong. Daniel switched on the spotlight mounted to his side mirror, angling it down the road. The flood of white light bathed the children, revealing details that stole his breath. The boy's cheeks were raw and split, skin cracked from cold, his lips tinged purple. His hoodie, 3 sizes too big, hung stiff with ice, sleeves stiffened at the cuffs where melted snow had frozen again. Jeans torn at the knees, exposed skin mottled red and white, and his boots. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight of them. One lace trailed in the snow, frayed and soaked, while the seams of the leather looked ready to tear apart. The little girl in his arms was worse. Her face was pale as candle wax, lips nearly blue. Her tiny hand clutched weakly at her brother's collar, but her head lolled with each unsteady step. Her blanket was so thin it seemed a miracle it hadn't turned brittle in the frost. Daniel opened his door fast enough that the wind slammed it back against him, icy air cutting through his uniform. He steadied it, stepped out, and raised his hands instinctively. Palms open, voice calm. "Hey there," he called, deep voice carrying across the snow. "It's okay. You're safe now." The boy froze mid-step. His dark eyes darted to Daniel, then to Valor, who had jumped down into the snow with practiced ease. The shepherd's posture was low, ears forward, tail sweeping slow arcs, every inch of him a careful, wordless message. "I am no threat. I am here for you." Daniel took a step forward, boots crunching. He studied the boy's face, gaunt, chapped, smeared faintly with dirt. The child's chest heaved with effort, each breath clouding the air in sharp bursts. He looked too old for 12, and yet heartbreakingly small. "Son," Daniel said softly, lowering his voice as though afraid words might shatter the boy's fragile composure. "What's your name?" The boy didn't answer. His grip on the little girl tightened, his shoulders curling around her in a shield. His lips trembled, not just from cold, but from fear. And then he whispered, "Please." His voice cracked, thin as breaking glass. "Please don't take us back there." The words punched straight through Daniel's chest. He felt them more than he heard them. A plea, raw and trembling, carrying a weight no child should have known. Daniel's throat tightened. He crouched slightly, keeping his hands visible. "Back where, son?" he asked gently. "Can you tell me?" But the boy only shook his head, tears mingling with snow on his lashes. He clutched the little girl closer, her blanket slipping enough for Daniel to see the edge of her lips, tinged the color of bruised plums. Valor moved then, slow, deliberate, padding closer in the snow until he was just a few feet away. He lowered himself further, chest brushing the icy ground, muzzle angled down. Then, in a gesture Daniel had seen break through fear countless times, Valor stretched his head forward, leaving it there, still, steady, waiting. The boy's gaze flicked to him, uncertain. His cracked fingers shifted against the girl's blanket, twitching as though torn between instinct to recoil and instinct to trust. For a long moment, no one moved. The forest itself seemed to still, waiting. Finally, almost against his own will, the boy let his free hand hover, then drop to Valor's fur. His fingers sank into the thick ruff at the dog's neck. Warmth, solidness, a living thing that did not flinch. Valor didn't move, save for the faint thump of his tail brushing snow. His amber eyes locked onto the boy's, holding him with that quiet, unshakable patience only dogs possessed. The boy's shoulders sagged a fraction. His lips parted, a shiver rolling through him as though he'd been holding himself together too tightly for too long. Daniel stepped closer, voice low, steady. "You're not going back anywhere you don't want to," he promised. "Not tonight. Not ever again." The boy's eyes flicked to him, searching, weighing, a child forced to carry the kind of caution that belonged to grown men. After a long pause, he gave the smallest nod, barely more than a dip of his chin. Daniel moved then, carefully, peeling off his heavy patrol jacket. He draped it over the boy's narrow shoulders, the fabric dwarfing his thin frame. The boy clung tighter to the girl as Daniel tucked the jacket around them both. "What's her name?" Daniel asked softly, adjusting the collar so it shielded her face from the wind. The boy swallowed, voice hoarse. "Emily," he whispered. "She's cold. She's worse than me." Daniel's jaw tightened. He could hear the quiet desperation woven into those words. The way the boy didn't complain about his own raw hands, his cracked lips, his frozen knees. All that mattered was the child in his arms. "You did good, son," Daniel said, his voice firm but kind. "You kept her safe this long. Let me help you now." The boy looked down at Emily, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face with a trembling hand. Her small chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. He kissed her forehead quickly, as though afraid he might not get another chance, then gave Daniel a wary nod. Behind them, the SUV idled, headlights casting halos of light into the swirling snow. Daniel extended a hand, not rushing, not forcing, just holding it out, steady as stone. After a moment, the boy shifted Emily in his arms and reached for it. His palm was cracked, skin split from cold, but the grip was strong, stronger than Daniel would have expected from a child. "Good man," Daniel murmured, tightening his hold just enough to steady him. "Let's get you both warm." Valor rose beside them, pressing against the boy's leg, lending his strength to the weight he carried. Snow swirled around them, but in that fragile circle of headlights, something else pressed closer too. Not silence, not cold, but the first fragile breath of safety. The SUV idled at the shoulder, its headlights throwing fragile halos into the storm. Wind rattled against the doors, snow swirling like shards of glass across the beams. Daniel guided the boy carefully toward the warmth of the vehicle, his heavy coat already draped around the child's narrow shoulders. Up close, Daniel could feel just how frail he was. Jacob's frame shook beneath the fabric, bones sharp as though the cold had carved him down to the barest survival. Yet even in his weakness, he clutched Emily tight, refusing to let go. "Easy now," Daniel murmured, his voice calm, steady, the way he spoke to frightened civilians and broken men alike. "You're safe. Let me help her." Jacob hesitated, eyes wide with distrust, then slowly allowed Daniel to slip his arms beneath the little girl. She weighed almost nothing, just a bundle of frozen blanket and trembling breath. Her lips parted faintly, a shallow gasp, and Daniel's heart clenched hard in his chest. Vala was there, circling close, pressing his body against Jacob's leg, as though to remind him he wasn't alone. The boy's cracked hand dipped instinctively into the shepherd's fur, fingers curling tight. Vala accepted it silently, amber eyes locking with Daniel's in that wordless language they had shared for years. Daniel eased open the back door of the SUV. Warm air rushed out, fogging in the cold night, carrying the faint smell of leather, coffee, and Vala's own musk. Daniel laid Emily gently on the seat, reaching for the emergency kit stowed in the side panel. His fingers moved quickly, unrolling a silver thermal blanket and tucking it snugly around the child's small body. The fabric crinkled softly, catching the glow of the dashboard lights like a fragile shield of metal and warmth. Jacob scrambled in beside her, still wrapped in Daniel's coat. He positioned himself so Emily's head rested against his chest again, his hand gripping hers with desperate resolve. His lips moved soundlessly, a whisper of comfort, as though his voice alone could anchor her to the world. Daniel slid into the driver's seat, one glance into the rearview mirror, etching the image into his memory. The boy hunched over the girl, wrapped in borrowed warmth, refusing to surrender even an inch of his vigil. Beside them, Vala leapt gracefully into the cabin, curling on the floorboards with practiced ease. He positioned himself lengthwise, his thick coat pressed against Jacob's knees, radiating heat. Slowly, the boy's shoulders loosened as Vala's body heat seeped into his frozen limbs. The heater roared stronger now, filling the SUV with waves of comfort. The windows fogged, blurring the storm outside into muted patterns of gray and white. For the first time since stepping out into the night, Daniel felt the air thaw against his skin. He drove slowly, carefully, tires gripping the icy road, but his focus was divided between the path ahead and the reflection in the mirror. "Her breathing's shallow," Jacob whispered suddenly, voice hoarse. Daniel caught his gaze in the mirror. "She'll be okay. Just keep holding her. You're doing good." The boy nodded faintly, but didn't ease his grip. His cracked knuckles whitened as he clutched Emily's small hand. He seemed terrified that if he let go, she would vanish, slip back into whatever darkness they had escaped. Vala shifted, laying his chin gently across Jacob's thigh. The boy blinked at him, lips trembling, then let his free hand sink into the thick fur once more. His fingers clenched, released, then clutched again, grounding himself in the steady rise and fall of the shepherd's breathing. Daniel swallowed hard, eyes flicking back to the road. He had seen countless rescues, countless victims pulled from the grip of cold or cruelty. But something about this boy's quiet defiance struck him deeper. He wasn't just protecting his sister. He was carrying the weight of being both child and guardian, brother and parent, survivor and shield. The SUV glided through the storm, the hum of the engine a steady backdrop to the fragile symphony inside. The shallow breaths of Emily, the ragged inhale and exhale of Jacob, the rhythmic pant of Vala, and Daniel's own heartbeat pounding louder than it should. After a long stretch of silence, Jacob spoke again. His voice was soft, uncertain, as though testing the safety of words in this new space. Are you going to take us back?" Daniel gripped the wheel tighter, the plea from earlier echoing in his head. "Please don't take us back there." He kept his voice calm, steady, even as his chest ached. "No, son," he said quietly. "You're not going back. Not tonight. Not ever." Jacob studied him through the fogged glass, searching for cracks in his promise. After a moment, he lowered his gaze back to Emily, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His lips pressed against her temple, a silent vow layered over Daniel's own. The heater worked its slow miracle. Color crept faintly back into Emily's cheeks. She stirred, her small fingers twitching against Jacob's palm. His eyes widened, a tear slipping free as he whispered, "She's still here." Daniel's throat tightened. He forced himself to focus on the winding road, on the fragile task of carrying 3 souls through the storm. Valor shifted once more, curling his body tighter around Jacob's legs, tail brushing against Emily's blanket. He didn't close his eyes. He stayed alert, sentinel even in the cocoon of warmth, his ears flicking at every sound. And so they drove on. Man, dog, and 2 children bound together by the kind of night that sears itself into memory. The storm outside battered the mountains, but within the SUV, a fragile haven had formed. Jacob never loosened his grip on Emily's hand. Valor never left his side. And Daniel, glancing at them in the mirror, whispered to himself words only the dog might have heard. "We've got them now. We won't let them go." The storm had followed them into town, clinging to the rooftops and windows. But the police station stood like a stubborn refuge against the cold. Its brick walls were weathered, its paint chipped by years of mountain winters. But inside, the building held a quiet warmth, born not of grandeur, but of familiarity. The floorboards creaked under Daniel's boots as he carried Emily inside, the faint smell of strong coffee and old paper hanging in the air. The overhead lights buzzed softly, casting yellow halos over the scarred wooden desks and bulletin boards cluttered with flyers no one had taken down in years. It was not a place built for comfort, but compared to the merciless Sierra night, it might as well have been a sanctuary. Jacob followed close behind, Daniel's oversized jacket still drowning his thin frame. His wide eyes darted from wall to wall, scanning every sound. The scrape of a chair, the hum of a vending machine, the murmured voices of officers in another room. Emily stirred weakly in Daniel's arms, her tiny fists clutching the corner of the thermal blanket. Daniel guided them toward the padded chairs near his desk, lowering Emily gently onto Jacob's lap. The boy pulled her close at once, curling around her as though his body alone could shield her from the world. His lips brushed her hair, whispering words too soft to catch. Valor padded in behind them, nails clicking faintly against the wood, before settling with practiced ease at Jacob's feet. The shepherd lay down, crossing his front paws, head lifting just enough to rest on the boy's knee. The gesture was simple, but the effect was immediate. Jacob's tense shoulders eased, if only slightly. His cracked fingers found their way into Valor's fur, clutching it like an anchor in an unfamiliar sea. Daniel pulled off his gloves, exhaling slowly. He knew this fragile silence wouldn't last. There would be questions. There always were. But looking at Jacob's hollowed eyes and Emily's still pale face, he knew the children had already answered too many questions in their short lives. Tonight, they needed more than interrogation. They needed safety. The door opened with a gust of cold air. Every head in the room turned as Helena Graves stepped inside. She was tall, her presence commanding even in stillness. A charcoal coat hung from her shoulders, its collar turned up against the wind, and beneath it she wore the neat lines of a tailored suit. Her hair, dark streaked with silver, was pulled back in a bun that had seen long hours, and her slate-colored eyes swept the room with the precision of someone trained to notice what others missed. Jacob stiffened at the sight of her, pulling Emily closer, his fingers clutching Valor more tightly. Helena noticed. She slowed her stride, lowering the weight of her presence like a woman setting down a weapon. Her gaze softened, the steel in her eyes bending into something quieter, something only those who had lost could recognize in each other. Daniel met her halfway. "Helena," he said, his voice low but edged with relief. "Thanks for coming so quick." Her eyes flicked past him, landing on the children. For a moment, her expression barely shifted, but Daniel caught the faintest tightening at the corner of her mouth. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what kind of shadows children could carry. "Where did you find them?" she asked, voice low, measured. "Half a mile from the ridge," Daniel replied. He carried her the whole way. Helena's eyes lingered on Jacob, on the two thin arms wrapped around Emily, the split lips, the guarded stare that belonged to someone far older than 12. She nodded once, then drew in a breath before approaching. She crouched down slowly, lowering herself until she was level with Jacob. Her coat brushed the floor, her folder still tucked under one arm. When she spoke, her voice had lost all the sharp edges it carried in briefing rooms and court testimonies. It was softer now, steady as a lullaby meant to coax trust out of silence. "Hi, Jacob," she said. The boy flinched, his lips pressing tight. He hadn't given his name. Helena noticed the tension, but didn't push. She glanced at Emily instead, her voice lightening. "She's beautiful," she whispered, as though sharing a secret. "Is she your sister?" Jacob hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. His hand stroked Emily's damp hair, shielding her face from view. Vala's tail thumped faintly against the floor. The boy startled, then looked down at the shepherd, who gazed up at him with unblinking patience. Something eased in his expression, a tiny crack in the wall he had built. Helena leaned back on her heels, giving him space. "I'm Helena," she said. "I work with families. I try to help kids find their way back home." The word home flickered in Jacob's eyes. Pain, longing, disbelief, all tangled in a heartbeat. He lowered his gaze quickly, but not before Daniel saw it. The room was still except for the hum of the heater and the soft sound of Emily's breathing against Jacob's chest. Helena didn't rush, didn't press. She had learned long ago that silence sometimes spoke louder than questions. She waited, letting the presence of Vala, of Daniel, of the warm station air work their slow magic. Finally, Jacob whispered, barely audible, "Don't. Take us back." Helena's throat tightened. She glanced at Daniel, and in that brief look, a whole conversation passed. Memories of other children, other nights, the unspoken understanding that whatever had driven these two into the snow was darker than anyone wanted to admit. She nodded gently, meeting Jacob's wary gaze. "We won't," she said softly. "Not back. Only forward." Jacob blinked at her, as though trying to decide if promises still had weight in this world. His hand curled tighter in Vala's fur. The shepherd shifted only enough to press closer, his head heavier on the boy's knee. Daniel turned away briefly, jaw tight. He busied himself at his desk, scribbling notes he couldn't yet make sense of. But his eyes kept straying back, to Jacob's trembling shoulders, to Emily's pale face, to Helena crouched in quiet patience before them. The storm outside battered against the windows, but inside the station, a fragile calm had settled. It wasn't trust yet. It wasn't safety earned. But it was the first step, and for now, that was enough. The station was quiet except for the steady hum of the heater and the faint scratch of Daniel's pen against a clipboard. Snow still hissed against the windows, but here, inside the walls, time seemed to move slower. Each second stretched taut by the weight of waiting. Jacob sat stiffly in the padded chair. Emily curled against him, her head tucked beneath his chin. Her breathing had evened, though every so often a shiver trembled through her small frame. Jacob pulled Daniel's coat tighter around her, the sleeves nearly covering her face. His hand remained locked in Vala's fur, the shepherd lying patient and steady at his feet. Helena Graves lowered herself into the chair opposite him, setting her folder gently on the desk. She didn't open it yet. Her eyes studied the boy's posture, the defensive curl of his shoulders, the way he tilted slightly toward the dog as though valor were the only ground beneath him. "Jacob," she began softly. She saw the flicker in his eyes, that wary flash of fear. "I won't ask you for more than you can give. Just tell me what you remember. Anything, even the small things." Jacob's gaze stayed on the floor tiles, scuffed and faded by years of boots. His lips pressed into a line. Silence stretched long. Helena didn't move, didn't press. She simply waited, the way one waits for a bird to trust the stillness of an outstretched hand. Finally, his voice came, rough and thin. "There was a house." Helena leaned forward just slightly, enough to show she was listening, not enough to crowd him. "A house." Jacob nodded faintly, his brow furrowing as though he were reaching across years of fog to grasp the fragments. "Yellow," he whispered. "The paint. Kind of faded, but it was yellow." Helena's breath caught. She didn't show it, but she noted the detail with razor focus. Jacob's eyes grew distant, unfocused. There were flowers, a row in front. I don't know what kind, just bright. And there was a lady. His lips trembled. She was nice. She smelled like cookies, when they'd just come out of the oven. The words faltered, breaking under the weight of the memory. His voice wavered, but for a moment, a fragile softness spread across his features, like a shadow of the boy he might have been before fear had hardened him. Helena felt the sting in her throat. She let her voice match his, hushed, careful. "Cookies," she repeated. "What kind?" Jacob shook his head, a flicker of frustration tightening his jaw. "I don't know. Just warm. Sweet." His fingers curled tighter in Vala's fur. "Then one night, I was asleep. Someone picked me up. I thought it was her. But when I woke up, I was in a car. It was dark. The road was long, trees on both sides. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the unspoken. Helena didn't press further. She knew when a child's memory was brushing against pain too sharp to touch yet. Before she could speak again, a small murmur broke through the quiet. "Cookie," Emily whispered. Her eyes fluttered half open, her voice weak but clear. One tiny word, floating like a fragile balloon into the air. For a beat, the room froze. Then something happened. No one expected. Jacob blinked, startled, and a sound rose from his throat. Soft, broken, but undeniably a laugh. It was quick, shaky, as though he wasn't sure he was allowed to release it. But it was real. Even Daniel, leaning against his desk, couldn't stop the faint tug at the corner of his mouth. Helena's lips softened into something that was almost a smile. And Vala, sensing the shift, thumped his tail once against the floorboards, the sound a quiet drumbeat of relief. Emily's tiny hand patted the edge of Jacob's hoodie, her lips mumbling again, "Cookie." Then she drifted back into shallow sleep, head heavy against her brother's chest. Jacob stroked her hair, shaking his head as though amazed she could still dream of something as simple as sweetness. The faintest warmth lingered in his expression, a light that hadn't been there before. Helena seized the moment, not with pressure, but with gentleness. "You did well, Jacob," she said softly. "You remembered something important, more than you know." She flipped open her folder then, fingers sliding across old case notes. Photographs clipped to files, Polaroids faded at the edges, dates scrawled in black ink. As her eyes scanned the names, The connections began to form in her mind. The yellow house, the kind woman, the sudden disappearance. She didn't speak it yet. Not here. Not now. But inside her chest, her heart beat harder with the certainty that the fragments were pointing towards something much larger than coincidence. Jacob watched her warily, then shifted his gaze back to Emily. He brushed his thumb gently across her small hand. His voice came again, quieter this time. She smelled like cookies, warm air, safe. His shoulders trembled, not from cold now, but from the weight of remembering what it felt like to belong somewhere. Daniel stepped forward, laying a hand on the back of the chair. His voice was low, steady. "We'll find out who she was, son, and we'll find out what happened. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Jacob didn't answer, but his hand never left Vala's fur, and when the shepherd exhaled, pressing closer, the boy leaned into him just a little more. For the first time that night, the air inside the station felt lighter. Not free, not healed, but lighter. Because a boy had spoken of a yellow house, a kind woman and cookies. And a little sister had whispered the word like it was magic. And for the smallest moment, hope had dared to return. The hour had slipped into late night. The kind of time when the town outside grew so still it almost felt abandoned. The storm had softened into a steady drizzle of flakes, drifting against the glass panes and muffling the distant sounds of evergreen. Inside the station, the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of wood were the only reminders that time still moved forward. Daniel leaned against his desk, arms folded, eyes lingering on Jacob and Emily, where they sat curled together on the padded chair. Emily was asleep again, her breath shallow but steadier now, while Jacob kept his gaze on the floor, one hand buried deep in Vala's coat. The shepherd hadn't moved for nearly half an hour, his chin still resting heavily on Jacob's knee, eyes half-lidded but alert. The fragile calm was broken by a voice from the front desk. "Lieutenant Cole," Officer Carla Bennett called softly, a note of unease threading through her tone. Daniel straightened immediately. Carla was young but sharp, not prone to nerves without reason. He crossed the room, boots echoing lightly on the wooden floorboards. "What is it?" he asked. Carla gestured toward the grainy black-and-white monitor mounted above the desk. It displayed the exterior camera feed, the dim glow of the streetlight falling over the patch of snow-covered lot in front of the station. There, just outside the halo of light, stood a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, head lowered beneath the brim of a dark baseball cap. His coat was long, dark, blending into the shadows, but the ember of a cigarette glowed briefly in the wind, flaring red before fading to ash. He wasn't moving. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't knocking on the door. He was just there, watching. Daniel felt a familiar chill crawl up his spine, one that had nothing to do with the winter storm. "How long?" he asked, his voice low. "Nearly 10 minutes, Carla answered, eyes still fixed on the monitor. "Haven't tried to come in. Hasn't left either." Behind them, a sound broke the silence. Low, guttural, steady. Valor. The German shepherd rose from his place by Jacob's side, ears pricked, body suddenly rigid. His amber eyes fixed on the front door, as though he could see straight through it. His throat vibrated with a growl that carried no bark, no aggression, just warning. A sound that tightened the air in the room. Jacob flinched at the noise, his head snapping up. He followed Vala's gaze to the door, his small body tensing instinctively. His grip on Emily's hand tightened, his lips pressing together until they whitened. Daniel moved closer to the boy, keeping his voice steady. "It's all right. You're safe here." But even as he spoke, his eyes returned to the monitor, watching the stranger outside. The man shifted slightly, turning just enough for the angle of his jaw to catch the dim light. Even through the grainy feed, there was something deliberate about the posture, predatory, measured. Not a passerby, not someone lost in the snow. "Could just be a drifter," Carla offered weakly, though her tone betrayed her doubt. Daniel shook his head. "No, he's standing too still. He's here for a reason." Valor's growl deepened, a rumble that vibrated through the floor. He padded toward the front of the station, his steps slow, controlled, each claw clicking faintly against the wood. He stopped at the door, muscles taut, nose lifting to scent the air seeping through the cracks. His tail was stiff, body angled in a stance Daniel knew too well. "I've seen the danger, and I'm ready if it comes closer." Helena stepped out from the records room, the folder in her hand, her sharp eyes narrowing when she caught the sound of the growl. "What is it?" Daniel pointed to the monitor. She watched in silence, her expression unreadable, but the faint tension around her mouth said enough. "This isn't random," she murmured. Daniel exhaled slowly, then turned to Carla. "Log it. Every minute. Every detail." She nodded quickly, scribbling notes while her gaze flicked nervously between the door and the monitor. Daniel moved closer to the children again, crouching so his eyes were level with Jacob's. "You're safe here," he repeated, firmer this time. "No one's getting to you while you're inside these walls." Jacob swallowed hard, glancing toward the door where Valor stood like a statue. "He's here," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to ask who, but he knew pressing now would only drive the boy deeper into fear. Instead, he placed a steady hand on Jacob's shoulder. "Whoever's out there, he's not coming near you. Not while I'm here. Not while Valor's here." The boy's eyes flicked to the shepherd. Valor glanced back at him, then, as if hearing the words, his tail giving one slow sweep against the floor. The boy exhaled shakily, pressing closer to Emily. The minutes dragged on. The figure outside didn't move toward the door. He didn't walk away. He just lingered in that strange purgatory between shadow and light, the ember of his cigarette glowing like a tiny watchful eye in the dark. Finally, Daniel straightened, his jaw set. "If he's still there at 5, I'll step outside and make contact," he said. Helena's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. Whoever that is, he didn't show up here by accident." Daniel smirked faintly, a hard edge to it. Then he picked the wrong night. He'd have to get through me first. And Valor. As if in agreement, Valor's ears twitched at the sound of his name, his gaze never wavering from the door. Outside, snow drifted lazily down, muffling the world in silence. Inside, the station held its breath. The line had been drawn, not yet crossed, but close. And Daniel knew, in the marrow of his bones, that this was no coincidence. The station had thinned to whispers by the time Helena settled into the records room. Snow tapped softly against the frosted windows, the night pressing close like a weight. The old desktop computer glowed faintly in the dim light, its screen casting pale shadows across her face. Daniel stood nearby, arms folded, one hand rubbing slowly at his jaw. He hadn't taken his eyes off the children in the adjoining room for more than a minute at a time. Jacob still sat with Emily, curled against him, his fingers woven into Valor's fur, as though the shepherd were the only anchor tethering him to this fragile sense of safety. Helena adjusted her glasses, typing quickly. The FBI's missing persons database flickered to life, a labyrinth of names, dates, and faces. She narrowed the filters. Age range, gender, approximate region, and a timeline stretching back 7 years. Her slate-colored eyes scanned the screen, sharp, relentless. Daniel shifted behind her, the creak of his boots on the wooden floor breaking the silence. "Anything?" he asked. "Not yet." Her voice was low, steady, though inside she felt the familiar burn of urgency. Every second mattered in cases like this. Every memory a child dared to speak could be the fragile thread that unraveled the whole truth. Rows of photographs scrolled past. Faces too many, too young, each one carrying its own story of absence. Helena's jaw tightened. She had lived in this world too long, carried her own scars from a sibling who had vanished decades ago. That pain had taught her two things: the cruelty of silence and the absolute necessity of finding answers before it was too late. Then her hand stilled. A small Polaroid photograph filled the screen. A boy, no older than 5, standing stiffly in front of a yellow-painted porch. His hair was slightly longer than Jacob's, but the resemblance was uncanny. The same slope of the nose, the same jawline, the same wary gaze that looked too heavy for a child to carry. Helena's breath caught. She leaned closer, clicking the file open. At the bottom of the photo, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "To Ethan, be brave." "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, peering over her shoulder. The sight struck him like a blow. The boy in the photograph might as well have been Jacob, only younger, rounder in the face, not yet hardened by years of cold and fear. "Jesus," Daniel muttered, exhaling slowly. His hazel eyes stayed locked on the screen. "That's him." Helena's hand moved across the file, pulling up the report. Name, Ethan Carter. Reported missing from Denver suburb, 5 years ago. She scrolled further. No legal adoption records, no foster placement. He just vanished. Daniel pressed a hand to the back of the chair, grounding himself. He thought of Jacob's, Ethan's, plea in the snow. "Please don't take us back there." He thought of the way the boy clutched his sister like she was the last piece of light in his world. And now, staring at the photograph, he understood. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a child stolen, hidden, forgotten. Until tonight. Helena clicked to enlarge the file photo, and then reached for a more recent Polaroid she had snapped of Jacob when he first entered the station. She placed the images side by side on the desk, the glow of the monitor reflecting off their surfaces. The likeness was undeniable. The shape of the brow, the faint birthmark near the left ear, even the haunted expression. The look of a boy who had already been asked to endure too much. 5 years, Helena whispered. Her voice trembled for the first time that night. This boy has been gone for 5 years. Daniel swallowed hard, and nobody knew where he was. His jaw clenched. Until now. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air in the room grew heavy with the enormity of what lay before them. This wasn't just about rescuing 2 children from the snow anymore. It was about unearthing a story buried under silence and fear, a story that stretched back half a decade. From the adjoining room came a faint sound. Emily's sleepy murmur, the soft brush of her voice calling for her brother. Both agents turned their gaze toward the doorway. Through the glass, they could see Jacob, no, Ethan, stroking his sister's hair, whispering something to soothe her back into sleep. Valor's head lifted, ears twitching, his amber eyes flicking briefly toward the records room, as if sensing the shift in the air. Daniel's throat tightened. "He doesn't even know who he is anymore," he said quietly. Helena closed the folder slowly, her expression hardening with resolve. "Then we'll remind him," she said, "and we'll make sure no one ever takes his name from him again." The heater rattled faintly, the hum filling the silence that followed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in white. Inside, a truth had finally broken through the fog. Jacob was Ethan Carter, the missing boy who had been gone for half his childhood. And tonight, for the first time in 5 years, he was found. The station clock ticked quietly above the duty desk, its steady rhythm filling the spaces between silence. Daniel stood in the hallway outside the records room, one hand braced against the cool plaster wall. The weight of Helena's discovery, Ethan Carter missing 5 years, still pressed against him like a stone in his chest. The desk phone rang, a sharp, almost startling sound in the stillness of the late hour. Officer Carla picked up quickly, her voice professional, but her eyes darted toward Daniel. After a moment, she covered the receiver with her hand and whispered, "It's for you. Says her name is Lynn Carter." Daniel's stomach tightened. He took the phone carefully, pressing it to his ear. "This is Lieutenant Daniel Cole," he said, keeping his voice steady. The reply came thin and trembling, the voice of a woman who had lived too long with absence. "My name is Lynn. Please, I saw the news alert. A boy found in the snow, around 12 years old, with a little girl. They said," her voice cracked, "they said he might be Ethan. Please tell me it's true." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, the weight of her desperation searing through the line. He glanced down the hallway toward the waiting area. Through the glass, he could see Jacob, Ethan, sitting hunched in the chair, Emily's head on his lap, Vala's broad frame curled protectively at his side. "Yes," Daniel said softly, his voice carrying each word with deliberate care. "He's safe now." On the other end, there was silence. Then a sound broke through, half sob, half laugh, the kind that came only when hope collided with years of grief. "Oh God, my sister, Margaret, Ethan's grandmother. She's asked every week for 5 years. Every week if anyone had heard a word. She never gave up. She said she'd know if he was still alive." Lynn's voice trembled. "Please, tell me she was right." Daniel's throat tightened. "She was right," he said. "He's here. He's alive, and we're not letting him go again." A muffled sob came through the receiver, followed by hurried words. "Can I see him? Please, I'll drive through the night if I have to." "We'll arrange it," Daniel promised gently. "But tonight, he needs rest. He and the little girl, Emily, they've been through a lot. Let them breathe for now." Another silence, filled only with shaky breathing. Then, softer, Lynn whispered, Thank you for not letting him disappear again." Daniel swallowed hard. "Ma'am, don't thank me yet. Thank him. He's the one who carried his sister through the snow to survive." He ended the call slowly, replacing the receiver with quiet precision, as though the weight of it might shatter the fragile hope that had just been born. When he turned, he saw Jacob watching him. The boy's eyes were dark and sharp, carrying the storm of someone who had overheard just enough to be unsettled. He had heard fragments, the mention of Ethan, of grandmother, of home. His hand tightened around Emily's shoulder, pulling her closer as though someone might try to take her from him. Daniel crossed the room slowly, lowering himself until he was eye level with the boy. Vala shifted but stayed pressed against Jacob's leg, the steady thump of his tail the only sound in the pause. "You heard some of that, didn't you?" Daniel asked quietly. Jacob's lips pressed into a line. He didn't answer, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed him. Daniel kept his tone calm, careful. "The woman on the phone, her name is Lynn. She's your aunt. She's been looking for you for 5 years. The boy's brow furrowed, suspicion and longing warring across his face. "They said nobody was looking," he whispered. Daniel shook his head firmly. "That wasn't true. Your family never stopped. Not for a day." Jacob glanced down at Emily, brushing her hair back with trembling fingers. His voice cracked as he muttered, "They'll take us back if we believe that." "No," Daniel said, more forceful this time. He leaned closer, hazel eyes steady. "Listen to me. You're not going back. Not to whoever hurt you. Not to the dark. You're going forward. From tonight on. Do you understand?" The boy's jaw clenched. His hand never left Emily's, but he met Daniel's gaze for a fleeting moment, searching for the cracks in his promise. There were none. Behind them, Helena appeared in the doorway, her presence quiet but strong. She didn't intrude, just watched the fragile exchange, her folder clutched at her side. Her eyes softened when Jacob finally leaned back, resting his cheek against Emily's hair, his grip on her hand, refusing to loosen. Vala pressed closer, his chin once more heavy on the boy's knee. Jacob's fingers curled into the shepherd's fur, grounding himself. Daniel stood slowly, his voice quieter now. "Rest, son. You've carried enough for tonight. Let us carry the rest." Jacob didn't reply, but his breathing steadied. He closed his eyes, clutching both his sister's hand and Vala's fur in a desperate triangle of trust. And though doubt still shadowed his face, a flicker of something else lived there now too. Something fragile, almost unrecognizable. The first hint of believing that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't been forgotten after all. The station had settled into that strange quiet that comes only in the dead of night, when paperwork sat unfinished, coffee cooled in forgotten mugs, and every officer moved with a hush, as though unwilling to disturb the fragile calm that clung to the place. But Vala wasn't calm. The German shepherd had risen from Jacob's side, his amber eyes fixed on the old coat draped across the back of a chair. It was the same tattered hoodie Daniel had seen on the boy when he carried Emily through the snow, thin, stiff with frost, frayed at the seams. Now it hung limp, thawing, a faint smell of earth and cold still clinging to it. Vala moved closer, his nails clicking softly on the wooden floor, his nose pressed into the fabric, inhaling deep. His chest expanded, then again, slower this time, his nostrils twitching as though he were chasing something hidden deep within the threads. Daniel, seated at his desk, noticed immediately. His hazel eyes narrowed. "What is it, boy?" Jacob, who had been watching his sister sleep in the padded chair, looked up sharply. His body tensed, instinctively pulling Emily closer, though she stirred only faintly at his side. He followed Vala's movements, confusion shadowing his face. The shepherd's ears pricked. He exhaled once through his nose, then nudged the coat with his muzzle, harder this time, as though insisting it wasn't just fabric, it was a key. Daniel stood, crossing the room. He crouched near Vala, running a hand along the dog's back. He felt the tension there, the rigid coil of muscles, the way every line of the shepherd's body seemed to say, "I've found something. Pay attention." Jacob's lips parted. His voice came rough, hesitant. "The trees," he whispered. Both Daniel and Helena, who had been reviewing files near the records room, turned toward him. Jacob's eyes were distant, as though he were hearing something none of them could. "The trees." "They whispered," he murmured, his gaze drifting toward the window, where snow fell in slow spirals beyond the glass. "That's what I remember. A path, the sound of the wind in the branches, like voices." Daniel glanced back at Vala. The shepherd had turned toward the door now, his nose low to the floor, body angled as though ready to move. His tail was stiff, not wagging, but deliberate, a signal of direction. Helena straightened, her voice firm. "He's picking up a trail," Daniel nodded, his hand tightening on Vala's harness. "From the coat. He knows where it's been." Jacob's fingers trembled against Emily's blanket. "I don't want to go back there," he whispered. His eyes filled with a shadow older than his years. "But I know the sound. The trees don't lie." Daniel crouched so he was level with the boy. His voice was steady, anchoring. "No one's asking you to go back alone. Vala will lead us. You won't have to step foot near it until we know it's safe. Do you understand?" Jacob met his gaze, doubt warring with a flicker of reluctant trust. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Helena gathered her folder under one arm, already calculating. "If Vala has the trail, we can mark coordinates at first light. We'll need a team. No mistakes if we're walking into something deeper." Daniel rose, still watching his partner. Vala had pressed his nose to the crack of the front door now, inhaling the cold draft seeping through. His entire frame was taut, vibrating with restrained energy, as though he were waiting for the command that would release him into the night. Daniel placed a firm hand on his harness. "Not yet," he murmured. "Soon." The shepherd stilled, though his eyes burned with purpose. Jacob shifted in his chair, brushing Emily's hair from her forehead. His voice was soft, almost too faint to hear. It was dark. The road, then the trees. They whispered like they wanted to tell me something, like they knew. Helena's slate-grey eyes softened briefly. "Sometimes memory speaks in pieces," she said gently. "Tonight we follow what we have. The coat, the trail, the trees." Daniel exhaled, glancing toward the storm outside. The snowfall was easing, the sky clearing in patches of pale moonlight. It would hold until morning. He looked down at Vala, whose ears twitched at every distant sound, every creak of the building, every gust of wind against the door. The shepherd was ready. And Daniel knew better than to doubt him. Vala didn't guess. Vala knew. He turned back to Helena, his jaw set. "At dawn, we follow." Jacob held his sister tighter, his voice breaking with a single fragile plea. "Don't let them find us first." Daniel crouched once more, his hand steady on the boy's shoulder. "They won't," he said. His eyes flicked to Vala, then back to Jacob. "Not while we've got him on our side." Vala pressed closer, his head nudging Jacob's knee once, a silent vow. And in that small station on a winter night, the stage was set, not just for a search, but for an expedition into the very heart of the shadows that had stolen 5 years from a boy named Ethan Carter. The coat had spoken. The trees would guide them, and Vala would lead the way. Night pressed down on the Sierra Nevada like iron. The storm had passed, leaving snow glittering under headlights, pines bent low, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. From the back lot of the station, the SWAT van idled, a diesel heartbeat in the hush. Sergeant Ortega moved among his men, quiet but precise. Helena stood near Daniel's SUV, hands in her coat, eyes fixed on the dark tree line. Daniel cinched Vala's harness, palm resting on the shepherd's shoulders until he felt the coil of muscle beneath the fur. "Not a word unless you must," Ortega said. "We let the dog lead." Vala's breath feathered white in the air. At the harness release, he stepped forward like a compass needle swinging true. At the station door, Jacob waited. He shouldn't have been in the cold, but he held something only Daniel could take, a smudged pencil sketch, folded and worn. Daniel crouched, asking softly, "You sure?" The boy nodded, smoothing the paper, a bend in the road, a culvert iced over, a forked oak, then forest. No house, just empty space shaded dark. He touched the tree. When the wind comes through, the branches talk. That's where we left the road. Helena leaned in, voice gentle. You did good. This helps. Valor pressed his muzzle to Jacob's hand, the boy clinging to his ruff as if anchoring himself. Daniel folded the map into his badge pocket. We'll follow this. You stay warm. Carla's got Coco waiting. Jacob gave a faint smile, kissed his sister's hair inside, then whispered to Daniel, Don't let him see you first. Daniel nodded. We won't. Not tonight. They moved into the forest. Daniel, Helena, Ortega, 2-point men, and Valor, leading like a shadow with purpose. Snow squeaked under boots. Radios hissed once, then fell silent, headlamps cutting shifting tunnels of white. At the forked oak, wind whispered through its hollow, more voice than air. Daniel touched the bark, listening. Valor inhaled deeply, passing scents, pine, loam, smoke, human. He slipped off the road, body low, tail level. They followed, snow deeper now, powder hissing around their legs. Copy. Team 1 moving off asphalt, Ortega whispered into his mic. Helena murmured behind Daniel, You ever notice how the trees hold sound at night? Like a cathedral no one built. Daniel didn't answer. He was listening to the dog. Valor guided them with checks. Sniff, confirm, move. His paw prints ahead like script reading. This way. They crossed a gully, Daniel's boots creaking on ice, before climbing the far bank. Town lights vanished. The forest felt older here. The pines, whispering low as if Jacob had been right. The trees spoke truth. How far? Ortega breathed. 400 out, Helena answered, a map, soft, in Daniel's palm. At a thicket, Valor slowed. Daniel crouched at a softened heel print in the snow. Humans. He tapped 2 fingers, not alone. The team thinned to whispers, blending with trunks and shadow. Then, a sudden halt. Valor froze, eyes burning into the snow. Daniel followed his gaze. Bootprints, heavy-set male. Beside them, large paw marks, disciplined stride. Dog, Daniel muttered. Helena's lamp swept across. Not random. Handler with K9. This matches intel. Malcolm Warden, trafficker. The name sank like stone. Daniel had heard rumors. Warden, always shadowing, slipping between jurisdictions. These weren't just tracks. They were proof. Valor growled low, vibrating through Daniel's hand. Then he jerked his head deeper into the trees, paw scraping. This way. Daniel's chest tightened. He's still out there. The wind groaned through the forest, sounding like warning. Helena's hand brushed her holster. If it's Warden, he'll use this ground. And if he brought dogs, he'll fight fire with fire. They pushed on, careful, until Valor stopped at a half-buried log. A smear darkened the bark. Daniel's lamp revealed blood frozen. Valor bristled, growl rumbling deeper. Helena's jaw hardened. Fresh, hours at most. Could be a child. Could be his own. Snow sifted down from high branches like ash. Daniel steadied the shepherd. Every fiber in Valor screamed to chase, but Daniel knew better. Not yet. We'll come at first light. He planted a GPS marker, orange tape flicking in the wind. Here, this is where the trail starts. Helena whispered into the trees. We're coming for you. The forest seemed to answer, but clouds swallowed the moon, lamps shrinking against the dark. They would become targets if they pressed further. Ortega was blunt. We call it here daylight, More gear. Relief mixed with unease. They began retreating, every step careful. The silence pressed harder, as though the forest resented their leaving. Vala obeyed, though he kept glancing back, whining low. Daniel glanced too, the orange tape barely visible, a fragile promise. Inside the station, Jacob stirred when they entered, eyes darting to valor. Only when he saw the shepherd's safe did his shoulders ease. He didn't ask what they found. Daniel's face told enough. Daniel crouched, steady hand on the boy's shoulder. Rest. Tomorrow, we will follow the trail. Tomorrow, we will end this. Promise? Jacob whispered. Daniel didn't flinch. Promise. Vala nudged Jacob's knee, sealing the vow in silence. For the first time, Jacob's eyes carried a spark of belief. The hospital sat at the edge of evergreen, like a stubborn outpost against the cold. Snow clung to its brick walls, the neon sign buzzing faintly. Inside, the sterile brightness smelled of antiseptic and lemon cleaner, a scent that clung to Daniel's uniform as he pushed through the doors. He knew these halls too well. Pale tile floors, humming lights, nurses moving with quiet efficiency. Yet every visit brought the same knot to his chest. Hannah's room waited halfway down the pediatric wing. The door was ajar, warm light spilling into the hall. Daniel paused with his hand on the frame before stepping in. She was awake. Propped against a pillow, quilt tucked around her shoulders. Hannah looked smaller than her 7 years, fever still flushing her cheeks. But her hazel eyes lit when she saw him. Daddy. The word loosened something inside him. He crossed quickly, lowering himself to her bed. Hey, Bug. His hand smoothed her tangled hair, lingering for warmth and reassurance. You came back, she whispered, fingers curling into his sleeve. Always. He meant it, even when the truth was harder. The heart monitor beeped steadily between them. Hannah studied his face, sharper than a child should be. You're leaving again, aren't you? His silence was answer enough. Daniel lifted her small hand to his chest. I have to, but I'll always come back. No matter what. Her lips trembled. Promise? With everything I have. She gave a reluctant nod. He kissed her forehead, holding the heat of her skin as if to anchor himself. Fragility had many faces. His daughter in this bed, Jacob and Emily in the snow. All of them deserved more than fear and loss. Hannah rested her head against him, eyes drifting shut. Do you remember what you used to say when you tucked me in? He smiled faintly. Courage is the road, and love is the home, she whispered, finishing the line before sleep claimed her. Daniel stayed still, memorizing the rise and fall of her breath. When the nurse slipped in to check her IV, his hand never left hers. Vala waited in the hall, head on his paws, eyes fixed on the crack beneath the door. When Daniel finally rose, he tucked the quilt around Hannah and whispered, I'll come back, Bug. I swear it. In the hall, Vala pressed against his leg, steady as ever. Daniel drew strength from his weight. The station was hushed in the small hours. Snow pressed the windows, muting the lamps outside. Inside, Jacob slept curled in a chair with Emily against his chest, both swallowed by Daniel's coat. Vala lay on the floor near their feet, amber eyes half opening to scan the room before drifting shut again. Helena stood at the window, arms crossed, gaze lost in the drifting snow. She'd been quiet since their return. Daniel watched her for a moment. "You're holding something." "I always am," she said. "But tonight feels different." She turned, light catching the lines at her eyes. Slowly she sat across from him, bracing herself. "I had a sister, Claire. She was 8. We were walking home one afternoon, and then she was gone. I looked away for 10 seconds. By the time I reached the corner, the sidewalk was empty. Her voice stayed steady, brittle underneath." Daniel listened, still. They never found her. No body, no answers. Just a cold case file. I was 16, old enough to understand, too young to do anything. That day, I decided I would never stop looking. For anyone. Not if there's still a chance. Daniel's hazel eyes softened. "And you never stopped?" "No." She glanced toward Jacob, holding Emily like a shield, even in sleep. "Every time a child goes missing, I see Claire's face. That's why I don't quit. That's why I can't." Daniel thought of Hannah's hand clutching his shirt. Fragility wore the same weight, no matter the face. "You know," he said, "most people would have walked away. Cases like these break you." Her smile was humorless. "I broke a long time ago. The trick is learning how to walk with the pieces." Silence settled, broken only by the heater's rattle. Valor lifted his head, tail brushing once across the floor, as if to agree. Daniel leaned forward. "Jacob. Ethan. He's clinging to Emily like she's all he has. If we don't give him something to trust, he'll sink." Helena nodded. "She's his anchor, the way Claire was mine, and he sees you as the line between what he ran from and what he's running toward. If you falter, he will too." Daniel felt Valor press against his leg, steady reminder. He ran a hand through the dog's fur. "Then I won't falter. Not for him. Not for Emily. Not for Hannah either." Helena studied him, then gave a faint nod. "Then maybe we still have a chance." The snow outside kept falling, night pressing on. 2 people long haunted by ghosts sat in dim light, bound by an unspoken vow. They would not let these children vanish into silence. Night pooled in the corners of the station. Jacob pulled his chair close to the bench so Emily could sleep with her head on his thigh. Daniel's coat wrapped them both, the silver blanket slipping down to Emily's waist. Valor stretched alongside the bench, chin on the rail, eyes fixed on the door. Jacob's fingers threaded through the shepherd's ruff, learning the rhythm of his heartbeat. He counted, lost track, started again. The rhythm mattered more than the number. Emily stirred, and Jacob tucked the blanket under her chin, a practiced motion. She sighed, her brow smoothing. Jacob glanced at the bullpen where Daniel and Helena spoke. Once, that would have made him want to run. Tonight, it only made his chest ache in a new way. He bent closer to Valor. "They might come," he whispered. "He has a dog, too, a big one." Valor's tail brushed softly against the tile, his body pressing closer until ribcage met Jacob's shin. A silent vow. "I'm here. If I fall asleep and they come, will you wake me?" The shepherd shifted until his ribs pressed steady against the boy's leg. 2 heartbeats syncing, the larger lending cadence to the smaller. Jacob exhaled. "Okay." He traced Valor's ear like the edge of a worn map, finding reassurance in touch. "What if they make me go back? They say papers matter, custody, placement. I don't know whose I am on paper. I only know I'm hers." His eyes dropped to Emily. "That has to count, right?" Valor exhaled warm across his wrist, one paw resting over Jacob's sneaker, in quiet claiming, "You belong here." Jacob whispered more, about the yellow house porch that creaked, the cellar air that smelled of rust and bleach, Emily's whispered cookie, like a match in the dark. Vala listened the way dogs do, ears for words, ribs for tremors, eyes for silence. When Jacob's voice broke, Vala laid his head heavy across the boy's knee. The weight said, "I know." Station noises shifted. A chair scraped. A gust rattled the front door. But Jacob didn't startle. Vala absorbed them, letting wind be wind. Jacob copied him without meaning to, his breath easing. Emily stirred, her hand sliding onto Vala's shoulder. The shepherd didn't move, accepting the triangle they formed. Boy, girl, dog. Helena watched quietly, file forgotten in her lap. In her mind, it was Exhibit A, the moment a child began to trust again. Daniel paused at the doorway, taking in the sight. Jacob bent toward Vala's ear, Emily's hand resting on the shepherd's fur, the coat cocooning them all. Something unclenched in his chest. He left as quietly as he came. Jacob whispered, "If we go tomorrow, and it's the right place, and there are other kids, can you find them? Even if they're quiet, even if they're underground?" Vala's eyes opened, met his, then lowered again. "Answer enough." Jacob nodded like a man signing his name with a dull pencil. "I'll try sleeping, but you have to keep listening." Vala didn't need to promise with sound. He promised with breath, bone, presence, an oath as old as fear of the dark. Minutes softened. The heater clicked. Snow hushed against the glass. Jacob's hand slackened in Vala's ruff, not falling away, only resting because it finally could. Emily dreamed beside him. Vala kept the long watch, heartbeat steady. If fear tried the latch, it would find a shepherd there. By 3 a.m., the night had stepped back. In the old station, a boy found an anchor. A girl slept with her hand on warmth, and a dog held the line until morning. Morning fought its way into the Sierra, on bands of snow, relentless and blinding. Pines bent under the weight, the storm combing sideways across faces and lenses. They stepped off from the flagged coordinates at first light, Ortega up front with 2 operators, Daniel and Vala leading, Helena just behind. Radios down to whispers. Every strap checked twice. Vala worked the point like he was born to it. Nose low, tail straight. He sifted air with long pulls until he found the buried thread of scent. Daniel followed, trusting what he couldn't smell. They crossed a frozen creek, boots sliding across ice. The storm blurred distance, trunks appearing and vanishing like ghosts. In a stand of old growth, the wind hushed, and Vala paused. Daniel crouched, hand steady on the shepherd's back. "Find me the end of this." Vala pushed on, bending right. The first sign wasn't sight, but absence. No birds, no skitter of squirrels. Even the wind held back. A silence drawn like a perimeter. Then the cabin appeared. Hunched in a clearing, boards warped, tin patched across its roof. A stovepipe leaned, but gave no smoke. Too quiet. Ortega's fist dropped. The line knelt. He read angles, the boarded windows, a door mottled with rust, the suspiciously clean snow. No tracks at all. Either the storm erased them, or someone had erased themselves. Vala stiffened, ridge of fur rising, tail rigid. Daniel felt the heat under his palm, sinking his pulse to the dog's. "I see you," he whispered. Helena scanned too. A ramp of snow pressed against the cabin wall, a notched stump too fresh to be old, a sapling bent with fishing line that caught the light when the wind shifted. Traps. Ortega signaled low. Wheeler, their demolition specialist, slid forward, confirming it with a hand signal. Clever, mean, rigged, Helena whispered. Daniel's eyes caught scratches on one boarded window, thin, frantic marks, as if small hands had searched for escape. The sight clenched something inside him. He thought of Jacob's map, ending in blank space, Hannah's hospital bed, children trapped where doors betrayed instead of freed. Snow thickened, the cabin fading and reappearing in bands of white. They moved to the clearing's edge, fanning into a breach pattern. Wheeler probed the filament, clamping it carefully until the trap was safe. Stable, she said. They advanced. Inside, the smell hit first. Stale wood, old smoke, a chemical tang. No meal, no fire, only bleach and emptiness. Valor swept the floorboards like a bow across strings, then froze. His growl stayed low, tail stiff, eyes locked on a seam. Daniel crouched. His beam caught a glitter of fishing line, stretched taut. "Trigger," he said. Ortega swore and called Wheeler. She traced the filament, clamped it, and secured the line with surgeon's care. The room exhaled. Daniel stroked Valor's head. Good catch. The deeper they pressed, the heavier the air felt. Then Helena saw the scratches near the far corner, lines gouged deep, curling into splinters. Too human, too desperate. Daniel shone his light, his stomach dropping as it caught on a pale fragment wedged between planks. A fingernail. The room stilled. Outside, the storm hushed. "They kept them here," Helena said, voice iron. Valor bristled again, nose angling toward the stove where the floor sagged slightly. Wheeler crouched, pressed her ear to the boards, and whispered, "Hollow." Daniel knocked. The sound came back deep, coffin-like. Wheeler pried at a seam until grime gave way to a hidden handle. She looked up. Trapdoor. The room seemed to freeze with it. Helena flicked on her thermal imager, pressing it to the crack. Blue haze gave way to shapes, 3 small heat signatures, clustered tight. She exhaled sharply. Children. Alive. The word landed like a detonation. Daniel's throat burned. He thought of Hannah's thin fingers clutching his sleeve, Jacob whispering about the trees. No child should exist as a heat signature in a cellar. Ortega's voice stayed clipped. "We breach slow. No mistakes." Wheeler checked for secondary traps, her movements exact. "Clear. We can open it." Valor whined, nose pressed to the seam, as if telling the children someone had come. Daniel steadied him. "Easy, boy. We'll get them out." Helena glanced at the screen again. One of the signatures shifted. Tiny movement, a head lifting. A sob, maybe. She caught her breath, then steadied it. Daniel pressed his ear to the wood. At first nothing, then faint fabric scraped, a muffled sob swallowed. He rose, voice raw. "They're right under us. They're waiting." Ortega signaled. The men gripped the handle. Wheeler eased the hinge, rust groaning like protest. Cold air surged up. Damp earth, rust, human breath long confined. Flashlights pierced the dark. 3 children huddled in the corner. Thin faces, wide eyes blinking against the sudden light. One clutched a smaller one, shielding him. The oldest girl stared back, blanket drawn around her, defiance holding against fear. For a moment, no one moved. The storm outside rattled, but did not enter. The silence stretched between captivity and freedom. Daniel felt Valor press into his leg, grounding him. He whispered the vow aloud, soft but certain. "We've got you. You're not alone anymore." The trapdoor gaped open like a wound. Cold air bled upward, damp and metallic, carrying mildew and the sharp ghost of bleach. Daniel leaned closer, flashlight cutting the dark. while Valor pressed tight against his leg. 3 small figures crouched in the far corner. At first they looked frozen, but then the smallest whimpered. A boy no older than 4, cheeks hollow, arms hugging his knees. Beside him, a slightly older boy muttered soundless words, his bare feet mottled blue. And the girl, 6, maybe. Thin, blonde hair tangled, skin pale as wax. Yet when she rose and stepped in front of the boys, there was nothing weak in the way she squared herself. Her eyes, wide but unblinking, carried a courage too stubborn for her size. "I'm Sophie," she said. Her voice wavered, but it didn't break. Daniel lowered the beam so it wouldn't blind her. "Hi, Sophie. We're here to help." Behind him, Helena's breath caught. Ortega signaled his men still, rifles lowered. Then, movement. Jacob had slipped forward, Emily clinging at his side. He stared down into the cellar, hollow-eyed, transfixed by the fragile girl shielding her brothers. His lips parted. "Don't hurt her," he whispered. Daniel reached to steady him, but Jacob shook him off. He stretched a hand down, trembling. Sophie hesitated, chin lifting. The silence was absolute, just storm hiss and stove rattle. Then she stepped forward. Bare feet scuffed dirt as she reached the base of the stairs. She looked at Jacob's shaking hand, then raised her own and placed it in his. The touch was slight, but it broke something open. Jacob sobbed, bowing under the weight he'd carried for too long. Sophie didn't cry. Her eyes only studied him, recognition flickering not of his face, but of his fight. Valor leaned closer to the opening, his amber eyes fixed on Sophie's, steady and still. The youngest whimpered, but the shepherd didn't move, offering only the quiet assurance, "I'm not here to harm you." Sophie squeezed Jacob's hand tighter. Daniel crouched. "There's a way out now. You don't have to stay in the dark." Her shoulders stiffened. "If I move, he'll come." She flicked her gaze to the cellar's far shadow. Daniel's blood chilled. Jacob's voice cracked, fierce. "He's not coming back. Not while they're here. Not while Valor's here." At his name, the shepherd exhaled deep, tail stiff. Sophie's gaze shifted from the dog to Jacob. Then she nodded, sharp. "Okay." The cabin had been too silent. That's why the sound struck like a blade. A creak on the stairs, heavy, deliberate. Malcolm Warden appeared. He descended slowly, boots dragging across warped wood. Wiry frame, sinewed and mean. In his hand, a scarred timber club. His face was weathered, but his eyes, black, unblinking, consumed rather than searched. His smile was worse, stretched across his lips but dead in the eyes, a mask copied from other men. "Well," he rasped. "Guests." Sophie flinched but didn't step back. Daniel stiffened at the trap door. His grip on Valor's harness tightened as the shepherd's growl vibrated through the floorboards. Warden's eyes flicked to the dog. For a moment his smile faltered, then he chuckled low. "So they sent a badge and his mutt." His gaze slid back to the children, settling on Sophie. "You don't belong with them. You belong here." Jacob's voice tore raw. "No." Valor's growl climbed, ears pricked, muscles coiling. Daniel whispered into his ruff, "Wait, not yet." But the shepherd's amber stare never left Warden. Behind, Helena brushed her weapon. Ortega's men angled rifles, but none dared fire with children so close. Warden tapped the club on the railing. "No one leaves until I say." The sound echoed like a heartbeat. The younger boys whimpered. Sophie stood taller, trembling but unbroken, a shield too small for her age. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight. 2 children holding a line against a monster. Warden sneered. "I always thought dogs could smell fear, but you won't scare me." He raised the club. That was the spark. Valor's growl broke into a roar. He launched from the trap door in a blur of muscle and fury. His jaws clamped Warden's wrist with trained precision. The club clattered to the dirt floor. Warden staggered back, snarling. But Valor drove him into the wall, splinters tearing under impact. Chaos erupted. Shouts, boots, cries. But Valor stayed locked, teeth pinning Warden's arm with relentless force. Daniel hit the ladder first. "Valor, hold," he commanded. The shepherd growled deep, pressing harder, keeping Warden pinned until operators surged in. Ortega's voice cut through. "Hands behind your head, now!" Cuffed in seconds, Warden spat defiance. "You think this ends with me?" But Valor snarled louder, silencing him. Sweat broke across the man's brow. The mask cracked. Steel cuffs clicked shut with finality. "Clear," Ortega barked. Daniel turned to the children. Sophie still stood with arms spread, shielding the boys. Her wide eyes locked on Valor, as if he were more miracle than beast. Emily whimpered against Jacob's chest, reaching for the light above. Daniel lowered his rifle, crouching. "You're safe now. We're here." Jacob trembled, but when he saw Daniel's face, his breathing steadied. He guided Sophie's hand into Daniel's. Her fingers shook, but did not pull away. "That's it," Daniel whispered. "We'll get you out." At his signal, Valor released. The shepherd stepped back, amber eyes still blazing, now guarding children instead of subduing a monster. One officer lifted the youngest boy, swaddling him in a thermal blanket. Another reached for Sophie, but she pressed closer to Jacob. Daniel nodded. "Together. You'll go together." Valor walked at their side as Jacob and Sophie climbed, Emily in his arms. Each step upward felt like crossing a border, from dark to light, from captivity to breath. Snow struck their cheeks as they emerged, but it was a different cold, clean, open. Officers wrapped them in blankets. Sophie clung to Jacob's hand, darting one glance at Valor. The shepherd emerged last, shaking dust from his coat. For the first time, Sophie's lips twitched toward a smile. Fragile, but real. Daniel dropped to one knee, hand in the shepherd's fur. "Good work, partner." Valor pressed his head briefly into his chest, then turned back to watch the children, tail sweeping the snow once, slow and sure. Behind them, Ortega's team dragged Warden from the cellar, wrists bound, fury twisting his face. But his shadow no longer covered the clearing. The children had been carried from darkness into light, not only by men with rifles, but by a dog who had drawn the line no monster could cross. And as Sophie tightened her grip on Jacob's hand, Valor standing sentinel beside them, Daniel knew this was more than rescue. This was the first breath of freedom. The storm battered the cabin, rattling shutters, hurling snow in hard gusts. But inside, silence pressed heavily. Warden was gone, dragged into the cold in cuffs. Yet the cellar still waited. Daniel descended first, Valor at his side. The beam of his flashlight swept dirt walls and rough planks, then froze. Chains. Iron bolts driven deep into joists. Links rusted smooth where wrists had pulled too long, shackles small enough for children, hooks sunk into dirt. The sight twisted his stomach. He touched one link with his glove. The faint rattle sounded like a ghost. Helena crouched nearby, jaw tight. This is it. No judge can ignore this. Valor stiffened, pawing at the far wall. Daniel followed his nose. Scratches marred the packed soil, frantic, uneven. In the seam of wood and dirt lay a fingernail, tiny and fragile. Daniel's voice rasped. They were children. A whimper drew his eyes back. Emily, wrapped in a blanket, clutched Jacob's chest. She stared at the chains, lip trembling, then buried her face in his shirt. Before he could comfort her, Sophie crossed the floor. She crouched, hand light on Emily's arm. She's scared, Sophie whispered. I was like her. The words cut the room open. Helena froze. Even Ortega shifted, stone cracking. Sophie rubbed small circles on Emily's arm. But you don't have to be scared now. They came for us. They brought the dog. Valor lowered his head. Emily sniffled, then pressed her palm to his muzzle. He stayed perfectly still. Her sobs eased into hiccups, her breathing evening as her tiny fingers clutched his fur. Exhaustion showed on Sophie's face, but pride flickered there too. Jacob reached over, clasping her hand. For a moment, they looked less like survivors and more like siblings. Daniel swallowed hard. Chains and scratches were proof of evil, but the children were proof of endurance. He forced his voice steady. We're not just breaking chains, we're ending this. Helena's reply was sharp steel. And making sure it never happens again. Valor pressed against Daniel's leg, tail sweeping once across the dirt. Above them, the storm groaned, but down here, the first threads of hope had begun to weave. The interrogation room glowed under a single fluorescent tube. The hum was constant, the shadows sharp. At the table, Malcolm Warden sat, chained, posture loose, smile thin and deliberate. Helena entered, folder in hand, Daniel against the wall. Valor wasn't allowed inside, but Daniel felt his absence like a missing limb. Helena's voice was crisp. Malcolm Warden, 48, no residence, multiple aliases, a cabin rigged with traps, chains in a cellar, 3 children alive who will testify. Warden tilted his head, smiling, pulling tighter. Testify. Children tell stories. Everyone knows that. Stories are written on their skin, Helena shot back. And on those chains. He chuckled. Chains are just metal. Stories buy you anything. His voice dropped. What did you find? 1 chapter. Helena pressed. Then give me another. A name. A door. He leaned forward, tar-black eyes gleaming. Names are currency. You make people pay, with blood or silence. Daniel stepped closer, voice flat. Life without parole. That's your future. The only choice left is whether you go down alone. Something flickered, calculation, not fear. Warden chuckled again. Alone. You think this is one man's work. There are doors you don't even know exist. You kick one down, 10 slam shut, and behind them are people richer, smarter, hungrier than you. Helena's nails dug into her palms, but her voice stayed calm. Then we'll keep hunting until we find them. And every word you give us decides how deep into hell we drag the people you protect. Silence stretched. Warden shrugged, chains rattling. Maybe, but falling ground buries a lot of people. Be careful where you stand. Daniel growled. Keep your riddles. We'll find them without you. Helena didn't look away. He just told us what we needed. There's a network, bigger than him. This doesn't end here. For the first time, Warden's smile faltered, just slightly, enough to reveal a crack. The command room was quiet except for the hum of monitors. Snow drifted outside, silver against the night. Then the phone rang. Daniel picked it up, voice steady. "Agent Carter?" A woman's voice cracked through, raw and trembling. "Daniel, it's me, Lynn, Jacob's aunt. We've searched everywhere. Please, is he—" A sob swallowed her words. Daniel inhaled, grounding himself. "Lynn, Jacob's alive. He's safe." The line went silent. Then her voice broke, fragile with hope. "Alive? After 5 years? You're sure?" "I promise. He's safe. And he's coming home." Helena stepped closer, listening to the ragged sobs spilling through the line. Years of grief spilling out all at once. Daniel's voice softened. "Lynn, breathe. Jacob is alive. You'll see him soon. Hold on to that." At the doorway, Jacob had edged closer, Emily still in his arms. His face was pale, eyes wide, drawn to the voice on the phone. Lynn whispered, steadier now. "I prayed every day. I thought I'd never see him again." "You will," Daniel said. "You'll hold him. You'll see his face. I swear it." Jacob pressed a hand to the doorframe, trembling. At the sound of her voice, something inside him shifted. A knot, long tied, began to loosen. "Home," he whispered as if testing the word. Valor lifted his head, ears twitching, then padded over to nudge the boy's hand. Jacob gripped his fur, grounding himself in the living warmth. Daniel turned, his tone gentle. "Jacob, you're safe now. We're bringing you home." For the first time in years, Jacob let himself believe it. His lips quivered, but a small nod came. His aunt's voice threaded through the static. "Hold on, Jacob. We're coming. You're coming home." Jacob leaned into Valor's fur, whispering with wonder, "They're coming for me." And for the first time in 5 long years, he believed it. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that comes after a relentless night. Snow lay heavy on the ground, muffling every sound. At the end of a narrow path, Martha Carter stood on her porch, hands clasped tight over her chest, eyes raw from years of searching and sleepless nights. Every crunch of snow made her heart leap, then falter. Through the trees, shadows emerged. Valor led first, nose low, body taut with vigilance. Behind him came Daniel, guiding Jacob carefully along the snowbound trail. The boy clutched his coat, face pressed against his shoulder, eyes wide and wary. Helena walked alongside, scanning the woods with sharp eyes. Martha's breath hitched. At first it seemed like another trick of snow and distance. Then she saw him clearly. Jacob, smaller than she remembered, thinner but alive. Her knees nearly buckled. "Jacob!" she cried, voice cracking the cold air. Jacob lifted his head at the sound. Recognition hit like a spark. His body stiffened, then suddenly he was moving, slipping from Daniel's arms. Snow sprayed as he stumbled forward, boots sinking, but he didn't stop. Martha rushed down the steps, arms wide. They collided in the drifts, clinging as though 5 lost years could be erased in one embrace. "You're home," she whispered into his hair, voice broken but certain. "You're finally home." Jacob sobbed into her coat. I'm here." His small fingers clawed to hold her tighter, needing proof she was real. Valor halted a few paces back, ears high, watching with calm patience. Daniel exhaled, shoulders loosening, while Helena allowed herself the faintest smile. The mission was complete. Martha pulled Jacob back just enough to cup his face. "You're safe now," she repeated, as if saying it could make it true forever. Jacob nodded hard, tears streaking his cheeks. Valor padded closer, nudging Jacob's arm. The boy turned and whispered, "Thank you, Valor." The shepherd pressed his nose into Jacob's palm, sealing the vow in silence. Snow thickened again, but inside that small circle of arms, coat and fur, warmth bloomed. After years of fear, the boy was home. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper. Journalists and families filled the benches, their faces tight with anticipation. In the defendant's box, Malcolm Warden sat shackled, his black eyes glinting with defiance. Daniel sat with the families. Emily clutched his hand, valor stretched at her feet, ears twitching, gaze fixed on the man who had once terrorized children. The trial had dragged for weeks, evidence of the cellar, chains, children's testimony. Now, the end had come. The judge's voice rang steadily. Malcolm Warden, having been found guilty on all counts, child trafficking, unlawful imprisonment, and abuse. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For a moment, silence. Then sobs broke loose. Parents clutched children, shoulders collapsed under relief. Emily buried her face in Daniel's chest, trembling with release rather than fear. Sophie, seated nearby, held her sister's hand tightly, her thin frame shaking, but her eyes burning with resilience. Valor nudged Emily softly, grounding her. His amber gaze never left Warden. The man's smile faltered. The empire he had built on silence and cruelty had crumbled in a single sentence. Helena whispered under her breath, "Justice isn't clean, but today it's clear." Daniel placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder, voice low. "It's over." The boy squeezed his sister's hand tighter. For the first time, he believed it. The hospital room glowed with late afternoon light, snow drifting past frosted windows. The space, once sterile with antiseptic, now echoed with small sounds of play and recovery. Sophie sat cross-legged on the bed, colored pencils scattered around her. She drew daisies in bright yellows and greens, her lips curled into the smallest of smiles. Jacob leaned nearby, tracing the crooked outline of a house, adding a crooked sun that made Sophie giggle. Valor lay stretched across the floor, tail thumping as Sophie rolled a ball toward him. He fetched it gently, dropping it back in her lap, then waited for her laughter, like a reward. The German shepherd's calm presence bridged the fragile gap between fear and safety. Daniel stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, eyes soft as he watched. Emily sat beside Sophie, fingers brushing her hair. The children's voices, tentative giggles, quiet murmurs, filled the room with the first fragile notes of healing. Sophie held up her page. "For you, Daddy," she said softly. Daniel's throat tightened. Valor gave a low woof, nudging her hand, as if seconding the gift. Jacob picked up a crayon, hesitating. Sophie smiled at him. "You can color too." Slowly, he leaned in, adding small strokes. Their hands brushed, and for the first time, Jacob let out an unguarded laugh. Daniel whispered to Emily, voice hushed with reverence. "They're learning to see the world in color again." Snow fell steadily outside, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside, the rhythm of pencils scratching paper, children's laughter, and the slow sweep of a shepherd's tail became the sound of life reclaimed. For months, fear had defined every breath. Now, in the golden quiet of this hospital room, hope had taken root. The scars would remain, but so would the proof of survival. Children who could laugh, draw daisies, and learn again to be children. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh linen, but for once, the scent didn't carry the usual weight of tension or dread. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows, brushing across pale walls, catching in the glint of Hannah's hair and making her small hospital bed seem less like a cage and more like a cradle. Daniel pushed the door open slowly, as if entering a sacred space, and the faint sound of Hannah humming to herself floated toward him. Hannah's head lifted, eyes bright beneath the soft curve of her eyelashes. "Daddy?" Her voice was tentative at first, but in it there was a spark that made Daniel's chest tighten, the kind of spark that meant hope had survived. Even in the quiet hospital room, the weight of all he had endured, the search, the fear, the nights spent wrestling with shadows, seemed to melt away in that single word. "I'm here, sweetheart," Daniel said, his voice catching slightly. He crossed the room and lowered himself to sit beside her. His hand brushed hers, fingers wrapping around her small, warm ones. "I'm not going anywhere." Hannah's lips curved into a small, cautious smile. "Are you really staying?" she whispered, as if afraid that even the walls of the room could carry away her hope. "I promise," Daniel said, voice firm yet gentle. "I'm staying. No more leaving, not today, not tomorrow. We're together." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of his vow, and Hannah's eyes glimmered with unshed tears. The way she looked at him, trusting him with her whole heart, made every hardship he had faced, the long hunts, the dangerous nights, the moments when hope seemed impossible, feel worth it. She was alive. She was here. She was his daughter, and nothing would take that away. The soft jingle of a collar alerted them both before Valor padded into the room, tail wagging in a slow, steady rhythm, ears perked, eyes glinting with quiet understanding. Hannah's laughter bubbled up, light and musical, and it felt like the first real sound of joy in weeks. She reached out, patting the dog's broad head. "Valor, you're here." Valor nudged her hand gently with his nose, careful and deliberate, as if sensing the fragility of this happiness. His steady presence grounded the room, giving comfort beyond what words could offer. Daniel smiled, watching the connection between Hannah and Valor, and felt a warmth unfurl in his chest. It was the kind of warmth that filled spaces left empty by fear, the kind that carried hope across impossible distances. Hannah's laughter grew, filling the corners of the hospital room with light. She tossed a small plush toy toward Valor, who caught it deftly and returned it to her. "Again, again!" she cried. And even the nurses outside the room paused, caught in the rare and contagious joy that seemed to radiate from the little girl. Daniel leaned closer, brushing a loose strand of hair from Hannah's face. "You've been so strong," he murmured. "I'm proud of you. All of it. The courage, the waiting, the hope. You held on." Hannah's eyes, wide and earnest, met his. "I was scared," she admitted softly. "But I knew you'd come. And Valor." Her small hand patted the dog again. "He stayed with me. You both stayed." Daniel's throat tightened. "We stayed," he echoed. "Because that's what families do. We protect each other. We find each other no matter what." Valor shifted closer, lying down beside Hannah's bed, resting his massive head on her legs. The rhythmic beat of his steady breathing was a lullaby of safety and loyalty. In that simple gesture, a bond was affirmed, a silent promise that she was never truly alone. Hannah reached down to stroke his soft fur, and Daniel saw the tension leave her small shoulders. Even trauma could not erase the healing power of trust, of a steadfast companion who had risked everything for her safety. The room was quiet now, save for Hannah's occasional laughter and the gentle thump of Valor's tail against the floor. Daniel exhaled slowly, letting the relief wash over him. This moment, fragile as it was, felt monumental. It was not just the culmination of their ordeal. It was the birth of something enduring, an unspoken, unbreakable connection that would carry them forward, beyond the hospital walls, beyond fear, beyond the long nights of worry. Emily stepped into the room, soft and unobtrusive, and knelt beside Hannah. "We're going to get you home soon," she said gently, voice soothing. "Safe, warm, with people who love you." Hannah's smile widened. "Home," she whispered, repeating the word like a prayer. Vala's ears perked at the sound, as if acknowledging the importance of that promise. Daniel placed a hand over Emily's, squeezing it gently. Together, they were a net, a safeguard, a lifeline for the little girl who had endured too much, but was now reclaiming life one heartbeat at a time. Hannah leaned back slightly, still holding Vala's head in her lap. "Can we play outside when I'm better?" she asked, eyes shining with the kind of hope that comes from surviving darkness. Daniel nodded, voice firm and certain. "Absolutely. We'll watch the snow. We'll throw balls. We'll make daisy chains if we want to. Nothing is stopping us anymore." The little girl laughed again, a sound like sunlight through glass, and Vala thumped his tail in rhythm with the joy. Daniel let himself sit back for a moment, letting the fullness of the scene sink in. There had been fear, loss, and shadows that seemed insurmountable, but now, here, they had carved a space for light. Hannah raised her hand, patting Vala one last time before turning to Daniel. "I love you, Daddy," she said, her voice steady, carrying a weight and a relief that only truth and reunion could bear. "I love you too, Hannah," Daniel said, and for the first time in months, he felt a deep, enduring sense of peace settle in his chest. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and forgiving, blanketing the world in quiet promise. Inside, a family had found its way back to each other, tethered by love, resilience, and the unwavering presence of a dog who had become much more than a companion. He was a symbol of hope, loyalty, and the promise of brighter days to come. In that small hospital room, light and warmth returned in waves, echoing the simple truth that had guided them all along. No matter how dark the night, dawn always comes, and with it, the chance to begin again. Night had draped itself over the forest like a velvet cloak, heavy with silence and punctuated by the faint whisper of wind through the pines. Stars scattered across the sky in scattered constellations, glinting like fragile promises, and the moon cast a pale, silver glow on the path that wound along the forest's edge. Daniel moved steadily, his boots crunching softly against frost-hardened leaves, each step a rhythm of reflection and quiet determination. At his side, Vala padded with measured steps, the dog's presence a tether to the present, a silent witness to everything they had endured. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine resin and damp earth. Daniel inhaled deeply, letting it fill his lungs, feeling the tension of the past months begin to unravel with each breath. He glanced down at Vala, whose amber eyes shone with alert intelligence, ears pricked toward every distant rustle. The dog's coat shimmered under the moonlight, and Daniel could almost read the story in the careful, measured way Vala moved. Every step deliberate, every pause full of thought and vigilance. "They never see it, do they?" Daniel murmured quietly, almost to himself, almost to Vala. All the quiet bravery, the choices no one notices, the nights we stayed awake while the world slept, the fear we carried, the doubts We silenced. His hand drifted to Valor's flank, resting there for a heartbeat. Valor leaned into the touch, as if acknowledging the weight of the words, and Daniel allowed himself a small, rare exhale of relief. The forest stretched endlessly, shadows deepening among the trunks, but Daniel felt no unease. Not tonight. Not when every step he took had been earned, and every mile walked had been hard won. The memory of the children in the cellar, their pale faces huddled together, trembling yet alive, rose unbidden. He could see their eyes, hear their whispers of wonder and relief, and the images made his chest ache in that way that carried both sorrow and gratitude. Valor nudged him gently with a nose, and Daniel looked down to see the dog's subtle, patient insistence. Keep moving, keep observing, keep breathing. Valor had been there through the chaos and the danger, through the impossible nights and the desperate hours. He had been more than companion, more than protector. He had been the anchor, the quiet heartbeat that reminded Daniel and everyone they had saved that courage was not loud and loyalty was not measured in words. Daniel's voice softened as he whispered to the night itself, "Courage is the road, love is the home." The words were fragile yet resolute, carrying the weight of all that had transpired. The kidnappings, the fear, the long hunt, the terror of possibility, the small victories, and the miracles threaded through darkened hours. Valor pressed closer, shoulders brushing Daniel's side, and the simple contact grounded him, reminded him that the world still held beauty, that even in the aftermath of shadows, light lingered in the simplest connections. They walked in silence for a long while, the rhythm of their steps echoing in the stillness of the forest. Daniel's thoughts wandered back to Hannah, to Sophie, to Emily, to Jacob. Faces he could almost touch in memory, voices he could hear in fragments of laughter and whispered gratitude. Every child rescued, every life reclaimed, was a thread in a tapestry of endurance, a testament to what determination and love could accomplish. The path sloped upward slightly, and Daniel stopped for a moment to look back over the forest edge. The horizon was a shadowed line, black against the silver light of the moon. And yet, somewhere beyond, he imagined a town quietly sleeping, families safe, hearts tentative but resilient. He let himself smile, a small, almost shy curve of lips, and Valor's tail thumped softly against the ground, as if in agreement. Daniel crouched briefly to rub Valor's neck, feeling the strength and calm that emanated from the dog. "You know," he whispered, voice low and filled with reverence. "We did it. Every impossible step, every moment we thought we might fail, we did it." Valor's ears twitched, his gaze steady and unwavering, and in that moment Daniel felt the full magnitude of the partnership they had formed, not a bond born merely of survival, but of understanding, trust, and love that did not require speech. The wind carried faint whispers, echoes of the past, footsteps on frosted trails, the quiet sobs of relief, the murmur of promises kept. Daniel let himself hear it, let himself remember the terror, the hopelessness, and the fear that had almost consumed them all. And then he let it go, letting the past exist where it belonged, honoring it, but not letting it weigh him down. Valor brushed his side again, steady and patient, a reminder that the present was where their strength lay. As the night deepened, Daniel adjusted the strap of his jacket and inhaled the forest air once more. The scent of pine, frost, and distant wood smoke filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He felt the weight of gratitude settle in his chest, the kind that presses gently and insistently, reminding him of every person, every life, every soul that had survived and been protected through sheer determination. He spoke again, almost to the stars, almost to Valor, almost to the quiet spirits of the forest itself. Every path we walked, every shadow we faced, it brought us here. It brought us home. Valor pressed closer, resting his head near Daniel's knee, eyes half-lidded but alert. The dog's presence was a living testament to endurance, a creature who had faced danger without complaint, who had risked himself countless times, and who now stood quietly, proud and unshaken. Daniel straightened and took a slow step forward, Valor at his side. The forest stretched endlessly before them, but he no longer felt the burden of its shadows. He felt the light that threaded through the world, fragile yet persistent, reminding him that hope was not just a fleeting thing, that courage had led them through, and that love, steady, enduring, unbreakable, was the home they had been seeking all along. For a long time, they walked that forest edge, the night holding them in its quiet embrace. Stars scattered like scattered prayers, the wind whispered promises, and Valor walked beside Daniel, loyal and steadfast. And Daniel, at last, allowed himself to feel the simple, profound truth of everything they had endured. The journey had been long, the road treacherous, the nights endless. But here, in the stillness of the forest and the steady company of a dog who had become so much more than a companion, he understood what it meant to be home. The night held its quiet witness as Daniel whispered once more, just to Valor, just to himself, "Courage is the road. Love is the home." And for the first time in months, Daniel felt the journey complete, not in triumph over others, but in the quiet victories of survival, loyalty, and enduring hope. Together, man and dog walked on. The forest edge stretched before them like a promise, infinite and forgiving, and the stars overhead shimmered like the quiet knowledge that the world, even after darkness, always held light. The morning sun stretched over the horizon like a gentle promise, spilling gold and warmth across the still frosted landscape. In the distance, the laughter of children carried on the wind, light and clear, threading through the trees, bouncing across the hills, and spilling into the open spaces of the small town that had endured so much. The sound was both fragile and triumphant, an unspoken testament to lives reclaimed, fears faced, and hearts restored. Valor stood atop a gentle rise, the wind ruffling the thick fur along his back. He tilted his head slightly, ears attuned to every note of joy that threaded through the air. The dog's amber eyes softened as he scanned the grounds below, children running freely, unafraid, their small hands reaching for games, for friends, for the sunlight itself. Each laugh, each shout of delight struck a chord deep within Valor, echoing in the memory of the darkness they had survived. The cellar's shadows, the winter storms, the cold, calculated cruelty, all were behind them now, existing only as distant echoes, reminders of what had been overcome. Daniel approached slowly, boots crunching lightly against the frost-hardened grass. He watched Valor, chest swelling with a quiet pride, the dog a living symbol of resilience and guardianship. The bond between them had grown stronger through every impossible hour, every desperate moment, every heartbeat spent in vigilance and courage. And now, in this golden morning, that bond radiated calm strength, a quiet assurance that the world had shifted, that the children were safe, that light had finally reclaimed its place. "Look at them," Daniel whispered, voice almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile perfection of the moment. His hand drifted toward Valor's neck, finding the familiar warmth there. Valor leaned into the touch, tail sweeping once across the frozen ground, a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to acknowledge the miracle unfolding below. There was no bark, no show of dominance, only the calm certainty of a being who had endured, who had witnessed horror and emerged steadfast, unbroken. The children darted through the open space, the youngest clutching the hands of older friends, faces flushed with exhilaration, eyes bright with trust. Sophie led the way, small but radiant, courage shining in the determined set of her shoulders. She laughed freely, unburdened by fear, a living emblem of survival and hope. Daniel's heart ached with bittersweet intensity. He remembered the terror in her eyes when they had first found her, the shadows that had loomed so large in her young life. Now those shadows had receded, replaced by sunlight, by joy, by the kind of laughter that could heal the deepest wounds. Valor padded down the gentle incline beside Daniel, matching his steps to the rhythm of the children's games. The dog paused periodically, nose to the wind, ears flicking at every sound, eyes soft, yet vigilant. There was a profound dignity in the way Valor moved, a quiet statement that even in the most ordinary moments, children playing, sunlight glinting on frost, wind carrying laughter, there remained the memory of vigilance, of courage, of the guardianship that had made this day possible. Daniel watched, feeling the weight of all that had come before, each terrifying moment, each perilous choice, each small victory etched into the path they had walked together. He recalled the icy nights in the forest, the hidden cellars, the trembling faces of children rescued from darkness, the confrontations with cruelty personified. And yet, here they were, bathed in light, the echoes of past horrors, softened by laughter, by trust, by the simple, enduring presence of a loyal companion who had never faltered. He crouched beside Valor, brushing a hand across the dog's thick fur, and whispered, "We did it, buddy. Every life saved, every fear faced, every shadow we chased away. It all brought us here." Valor pressed his head lightly against Daniel's shoulder, a quiet affirmation, a companion's comfort, a symbol of unwavering loyalty. From the edge of the field, Emily called out to the children, her voice mingling with the wind, her laughter a melodic addition to the symphony of joy. Jacob ran to her side, and their reunion, a fierce embrace, a shared smile, the weight of fear lifted from both their shoulders, radiated a tangible warmth across the scene. The children glanced up, some waving, some laughing, drawn into the gravity of the moment, learning that trust could be reclaimed, that hope could flourish, that love was stronger than the darkest night. Daniel rose slowly, feeling the weight of gratitude settle deep into his chest. He took a step toward the center of the field, watching the small, radiant bodies of children move and play, watching Valor at his side, unwavering, steadfast. The wind carried the scent of pine and frost, of warmth and sunlight, of possibility reborn. In that scent, in that sound, in that quiet perfection of motion and presence, Daniel understood that this was the legacy they had forged, the legacy of light. "Every step we took," he murmured, "every impossible hour, every fear faced, it brought us here. And it's not just us. It's them. It's all of us together, moving forward, learning to trust again, learning to hope again." Valor nudged him gently, tail sweeping once more across the ground, a small, deliberate gesture, almost ceremonial, almost sacred. It was acknowledgement of what had been endured and of what had been achieved. As the children ran and laughed, as Sophie's small voice called encouragement to a friend, as the sun climbed higher and glinted across frost and pine needles, Daniel felt the full magnitude of the day settle within him. Love had healed, courage had guided, and loyalty had sustained. Shadows had been faced and overcome, and in their place, light had been restored. Valor paused at Daniel's side, sitting and tilting his head toward the distant horizon. Daniel stood beside him, hand resting lightly on the dog's back, and together they watched the children, the sunlight, the forest, and the world in its quiet, radiant resilience. And in that shared silence, Daniel understood that this was the true victory, not in punishment, not in confrontation, not even in survival, but in the enduring ability to create joy, to nurture hope, to bring light out of darkness, one heart at a time. The wind carried the laughter farther, scattering it across hills and valleys, threading it through the trees and over rooftops, letting the world know, in its gentle insistence, that courage, love, and loyalty could prevail. And valor, steadfast and unwavering, tail sweeping once across the frozen ground, seemed to nod in agreement, a silent sentinel of hope, a living monument to the miracles that courage and love could create. Daniel exhaled, the cool air filling his lungs with the scent of possibility, and whispered, "This is our legacy, buddy, a legacy of light." Valor's amber eyes glimmered in the morning sun, steady, watchful, proud. And as the children laughed, ran, and lived freely, the world felt for a moment perfectly balanced between memory and hope, shadow and light, fear and courage. I'd love to share a few thoughts with you. Stories like Valor's remind us of the extraordinary bond we share with our dogs, the quiet loyalty of a German shepherd, the way they sense our fears and joys, and how their presence alone can bring comfort and courage. These connections are more than companionship. They're a kind of unspoken understanding that fills our hearts in ways words often can't. If you've ever felt that quiet nudge, that knowing glance from your dog, you know exactly what I mean. There are gentle ways to deepen that connection, to truly understand and honor your dog's heart and instincts. I've come across a resource that feels thoughtful, practical, and full of respect for the dogs we love. It's something I'd share with a friend, not a customer. You can check it out whenever it feels right for you. No pressure, just something to explore if it resonates. Take a moment with your dog today. Sit together, watch the world, share a quiet walk. Those small, patient moments often carry the most meaning. After all, love, loyalty, and trust are the kind of legacies that last far longer than any words.